Teacher fails wealthy student and receives million-dollar inheritance 30 years later. In a small New England town, a dedicated high school teacher's unwavering commitment to academic integrity sets off a chain of events that spans 3 decades. What begins as a simple act of professional ethics evolves into a tale of unexpected twists, moral dilemmas, and life-altering consequences that will leave you questioning the true nature of success, integrity, and the lasting impact of our choices. Sarah Mitchell stood at the front of her classroom, her chalk-dusted fingers gripping a well-worn textbook as she surveyed the sea of young faces before her. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows of Evergreen High School, casting long shadows across the scuffed linoleum floor. At 32, Sarah was the youngest teacher on staff, but her steely resolve and unwavering commitment to her students had quickly earned her a reputation as one of the toughest and most respected educators in the small town of Millbrook, Connecticut. As the final bell of the day rang out, a cacophony of shuffling papers and scraping chairs filled the air. Sarah's voice cut through the commotion. "Don't forget, your final projects are due next week. This accounts for 30% of your grade, so make sure you bring your A game." Most of the students filed out, their chatter fading down the hallway. But one remained behind, sauntering up to Sarah's desk with an air of casual confidence that set her teeth on edge. "Ms. Mitchell," drawled Jason Blackwell, his designer backpack slung carelessly over one shoulder. "About that project." Sarah's grip on her textbook tightened imperceptibly. Jason was the son of Robert Blackwell, CEO of Blackwell Industries and the wealthiest man in Millbrook. His smug smile and perfectly coiffed hair screamed of privilege, a stark contrast to the hard-working, middle-class ethos that Sarah herself had grown up with. "Yes, Jason?" she replied, her tone neutral but her guard up. "Well, you see," he began, leaning against her desk, "I've got this huge sailing competition this weekend. It's kind of a big deal, you know? Scouts from Yale will be there." He flashed what he clearly thought was a winning smile. "So I was hoping maybe we could push back the deadline for me? Just a few days." Sarah felt a familiar knot of frustration form in her stomach. It wasn't the first time Jason had tried to leverage his family's status for special treatment. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the confrontation she knew was coming. "I'm sorry, Jason, but that's not possible," she said firmly. "The deadline is the same for everyone. You've had weeks to prepare." Jason's smile faltered, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "Come on, Ms. Mitchell. You know how important this is for my future. My dad's a major donor to the school. I'm sure we could work something out." The implication hung heavy in the air between them. Sarah felt a surge of anger, but kept her voice steady. "The rules apply to everyone, Jason. No exceptions." For a moment, Jason's carefully cultivated facade cracked, revealing a flash of the entitled anger simmering beneath. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone, replaced by a cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We'll see about that," he muttered, pushing off from the desk and stalking towards the door. "You might want to reconsider, Ms. Mitchell. Things have a way of working out for me." As the door slammed behind him, Sarah let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She sank into her chair, the weight of the confrontation settling on her shoulders. She knew she had done the right thing. Fairness and integrity were the cornerstones of her teaching philosophy. But as she gazed out the window at the sleek sports car Jason was climbing into, a stark reminder of the power his family wielded in this town, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just set something in motion. Something that would have consequences far beyond a simple grade on a high school project. Little did Sarah know, as she began gathering her things to head home, that this seemingly routine interaction would be the first domino to fall in a chain of events that would span decades and change the course of multiple lives forever. The line in the sand had been drawn, and there was no going back. The following week passed in a blur of final projects and mounting tension. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over her since her confrontation with Jason. She found herself glancing over her shoulder in the halls, half expecting to see Robert Blackwell's imposing figure looming behind her. On the day the projects were due, Sarah arrived early, her stomach knotted with anticipation. As students filed in, she watched Jason closely. He swaggered to his seat, empty-handed and smirking. When it came time to present, he stood up confidently. "Ms. Mitchell," he announced, "I'm afraid I don't have my project today, but my father would like to speak with you after class." A hush fell over the room. Sarah felt her cheeks burn as 24 pairs of eyes swiveled between her and Jason. She took a steadying breath. "Thank you, Jason. Please take your seat. We'll discuss this later." The rest of the class passed in a fog. As the final bell rang, Sarah steeled herself for what was to come. She didn't have to wait long. Robert Blackwell filled the doorway, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the worn classroom decor. His smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, striding forward to shake her hand. His grip was firm, bordering on painful. "I understand there's been a misunderstanding about my son's project." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "There's no misunderstanding, Mr. Blackwell. Jason was given the same deadline as every other student. He chose not to complete the assignment." Blackwell's smile tightened. "Now, let's be reasonable. Jason had an important competition. Surely you understand the pressure these kids are under. I'm sure we can come to some arrangement." The implication was clear. Sarah felt a surge of indignation. "Mr. Blackwell, I don't make exceptions. It wouldn't be fair to the other students." "Fair?" Blackwell chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Life isn't fair, Ms. Mitchell. I would think an educator would understand that. Now, I've made a very generous donation to the school's science department. I'm sure Principal Hendricks would agree that some flexibility is in order." Sarah's hands clenched at her sides. "I'm sorry, but my decision is final. Jason will receive a 0 for the project." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Blackwell's facade of geniality vanished. "You're making a big mistake," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Do you really want to make an enemy of me? I could make things very difficult for you." Sarah's heart raced, but she held her ground. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Blackwell?" He leaned in close, his breath hot on her face. "I'm giving you one last chance to reconsider. For your own good." In that moment, Sarah saw a flash of the future years of compromise, of looking the other way, of sacrificing her principles for an easy life. And she knew she couldn't do it. "My answer is still no," she said firmly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have papers to grade." Blackwell straightened, his face a mask of cold fury. "You'll regret this, Ms. Mitchell. Mark my words." As he stormed out, Sarah sank into her chair, trembling. She knew she had done the right thing, but the cost was yet to be determined. Across town, in the opulent Blackwell mansion, Robert paced his study, a tumbler of scotch in his hand. His son lounged on a leather sofa, scrolling through his phone. "Can you believe the nerve of that woman?" Robert fumed. "Who does she think she is?" Jason shrugged. "Told you she was a hard-ass, Dad. So what are you going to do about it?" Robert's eyes glinted dangerously. "Oh, I have a few ideas. Sarah Mitchell has no idea who she's dealing with. By the time I'm done, she'll wish she'd never set foot in Millbrook." As night fell over the quiet town, the wheels of retribution were already in motion. Sarah Mitchell's stand for integrity was about to cost her more than she could have ever imagined. The next few weeks unfolded like a slow-motion nightmare for Sarah. It started small, whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when she entered the teacher's lounge, sideways glances in the hallway, a sudden chill in her interactions with the administration. Then came the letter from Principal Hendricks, requesting a meeting to discuss concerns about her teaching methods. Sarah sat ramrod straight in the uncomfortable chair across from his desk, listening with growing disbelief as he outlined a litany of complaints. "Some parents feel your grading is overly harsh," Hendricks said, not quite meeting her eyes. "And there are concerns about favoritism." Sarah's laugh was bitter. "Favoritism? Because I refused to give special treatment to Jason Blackwell?" Hendricks winced. "Sarah, you have to understand the delicate position we're in. The Blackwells are major donors. We can't afford to alienate them. So we compromise our integrity instead? Sarah shot back. The principal sighed heavily. Just try to be more flexible, Sarah, for everyone's sake. But flexibility wasn't in Sarah's nature, especially when it came to matters of principle. She redoubled her efforts in the classroom, determined to prove her worth through sheer dedication. It wasn't enough. Strange things began to happen. Equipment she needed for lessons went missing. Her parking spot was repeatedly taken. Anonymous notes appeared in her mailbox, ranging from veiled threats to outright insults. The final straw came on a crisp autumn morning. Sarah arrived at school to find her classroom in chaos. Desks overturned, books strewn across the floor, and scrawled across her blackboard in angry red letters, "Leave or else." As she stood there, shock giving way to a cold, hard anger, Principal Hendricks appeared in the doorway. His face was grave. "My office, Sarah. Now." The walk to the principal's office felt like a march to the gallows. Sarah's mind raced, trying to piece together a defense. But as she settled into the now familiar chair across from Hendricks, she knew it was futile. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he began, his voice heavy with false regret. "But in light of recent events and ongoing concerns, we feel it's best to terminate your employment, effective immediately." The words hit her like a physical blow. "You can't be serious," she breathed. "This is because of the Blackwells, isn't it? They're behind all of this." Hendricks held up a hand. "These accusations are exactly the kind of unprofessional behavior we're concerned about. Please, don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." Sarah stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You're making a huge mistake," she said, her voice shaking with fury and unshed tears. "This isn't over." But as she walked out of Evergreen High for the last time, a cardboard box of personal belongings clutched to her chest, Sarah knew the truth. It was over. Her career, her reputation, her life in Millbrook, all destroyed because she dared to stand up to the town's most powerful family. That evening, as Sarah sat in her small apartment, surrounded by the wreckage of her dreams, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. With trembling fingers, she opened it. "I warned you, Ms. Mitchell. You should have listened. Enjoy unemployment. Arby." Sarah stared at the screen, a curious calm settling over her. In that moment, something shifted inside her. The fear and despair of the past weeks crystallized into a steely resolve. Robert Blackwell thought he had won. He thought he had broken her. But Sarah Mitchell was far from finished. This wasn't the end of her story. It was only the beginning. As she began to pack her meager belongings, plans already forming in her mind, Sarah had no way of knowing that her act of defiance had set in motion a chain of events that would span decades and ultimately lead to a twist of fate so extraordinary. It would shake the very foundations of Millbrook society. The game was afoot, and the stakes were higher than anyone could have imagined. The harsh winter wind whipped through the streets of Boston as Sarah Mitchell hurried along the crowded sidewalk, clutching a stack of resumes to her chest. It had been 6 months since her unceremonious departure from Millbrook, 6 months of struggle, rejection, and slowly rebuilding her life from the ashes. Finding work had been nearly impossible. It seemed Robert Blackwell's influence stretched far beyond the borders of their small town. Every promising lead would suddenly go cold. Every interview would end with vague excuses and promises to keep her resume on file. But Sarah was nothing if not resilient. She had moved to Boston, scraping together what little savings she had to rent a tiny studio apartment. She took odd jobs, tutoring, waitressing, anything to keep a roof over her head and food on the table. And all the while, she kept fighting, kept pushing, refusing to let the Blackwells win. As she rounded the corner, a flyer caught her eye. Teachers wanted Inner City Youth Program. Sarah paused, her heart quickening. It wasn't much, but it was a chance. The community center was a far cry from the polished halls of Evergreen High. The paint was peeling, the furniture worn, but there was an energy here, a sense of purpose that called to Sarah. Marcus Johnson, the program director, looked up from his cluttered desk as Sarah entered. His weathered face broke into a warm smile. "You must be Sarah. Come in, come in." As they talked, Sarah felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. Here was someone who cared about education, about making a difference, not about politics or power plays. "I'll be honest with you," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair. "This job isn't glamorous. The pay is low, the hours are long, and these kids, they've been through a lot. They won't make it easy for you." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I'm not looking for easy, Mr. Johnson. I'm looking for meaningful." Marcus studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right then, when can you start?" The next few years were a whirlwind of challenges and triumphs. Sarah threw herself into her work with a passion born of both love for teaching and a desire to prove herself. Her students, initially wary and defensive, slowly began to open up under her patient guidance. There was Tyrone, the angry young man with a gift for mathematics that Sarah nurtured. Maria, whose poetry blossomed once she found her voice. Jamal, who discovered a love for science that would eventually lead him to medical school. Sarah's reputation grew. What started as a small after-school program expanded into a full-fledged alternative school for at-risk youth. Grants came in, allowing them to renovate the old community center. Sarah was promoted to lead teacher, then curriculum director. On a warm spring day, 5 years after she had first walked through those doors, Sarah stood before a gathering of students, parents, and community leaders. As she cut the ribbon on their new science lab, she caught Marcus's eye. He gave her a subtle nod, his face beaming with pride. Later, as the celebration wound down, Marcus pulled her aside. "You've done amazing things here, Sarah. These kids, this community, you've changed lives." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. "Thank you, Marcus, for taking a chance on me when no one else would." He squeezed her shoulder gently. "You took a chance on us too, and look what happened." As Sarah made her way home that evening, her steps were light. For the first time in years, she didn't think about Millbrook or the Blackwells, or the career that had been stolen from her. She had found her purpose, her calling. She was making a difference. Little did Sarah know, as she climbed the stairs to her modest apartment, that fate was not finished with her yet. The echoes of her past were about to collide with her present in a way that would shock everyone, especially Robert Blackwell. Thousands of miles away, in a luxurious Millbrook estate, an elderly man sat at his desk, pen hovering over a legal document. His hand trembled slightly as he prepared to sign, his mind churning with regret and a desperate need for atonement. The stage was set for a twist that would turn everything upside down. 15 years had passed since Sarah's fateful departure from Millbrook. Boston had become her home, its bustling streets and diverse communities a far cry from the stifling small-town politics she'd left behind. At 52, Sarah had built a life she was proud of, her work at the inner-city school bringing her a sense of fulfillment she'd once thought lost forever. On a crisp autumn morning, much like the day she'd lost her job at Evergreen High, Sarah sat in her office, poring over grant applications. A knock at the door interrupted her concentration. "Ms. Mitchell." It was Aisha, one of the school's brightest seniors. "There's someone here to see you. Says it's important." Sarah's brow furrowed. She wasn't expecting any visitors. "Did they give a name?" Aisha shook her head. "Just said he's from Millbrook." The pen in Sarah's hand clattered to the desk. Millbrook, a place she'd worked hard to forget, yet one that still haunted her dreams on occasion. "Send them in," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The man who entered was a stranger to her, his suit crisp and professional. "Sarah Mitchell?" he asked, extending his hand. "I'm James Harrington, attorney at law. I represent the estate of Robert Blackwell." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "Robert Blackwell?" she repeated, her mind reeling. "What could he possibly want with me after all this time?" Harrington's expression was carefully neutral. "I'm afraid Mr. Blackwell passed away last month. I'm here regarding his will." For a moment, Sarah couldn't speak. Robert Blackwell dead. The man who had destroyed her career, who had forced her to rebuild her entire life from scratch. She should have felt relief, perhaps even satisfaction. Instead, she felt nothing. The anger that had once burned so fiercely had long since cooled, leaving only a dull ache of old wounds. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harrington," she said finally, "but I don't see what this has to do with me. Robert Blackwell made it very clear years ago that he wanted nothing to do with me." The lawyer cleared his throat, looking slightly uncomfortable. "That's just it, Ms. Mitchell. It seems Mr. Blackwell had a change of heart in his final years. He's left you something in his will." Sarah's laugh was sharp and disbelieving. "Left me something? What?" A final insult from beyond the grave. Harrington shook his head, reaching into his briefcase. "Not exactly." He pulled out a thick envelope and handed it to her. "This letter explains everything. Mr. Blackwell insisted it be delivered to you personally, along with this." He placed a small, ornate key on her desk. Sarah stared at the objects, her mind struggling to process what was happening. With trembling fingers, she opened the envelope and began to read. "Dear Sarah, if you're reading this, then I am gone, and you are no doubt wondering why I would reach out to you after all these years. The truth is, I owe you an apology. One that is long overdue and woefully inadequate. What I did to you was unforgivable. I let my pride and my arrogance destroy the career of a good teacher, someone who only wanted the best for her students. It has taken me far too long to realize the magnitude of my mistake. In the years since you left Millbrook, I've watched my son, Jason, struggle through life, never learning the valuable lesson you tried to teach him. And I've heard whispers of your success in Boston, of the lives you've changed and the difference you've made. I know that nothing I can do will erase the pain I caused you, but I hope that what I'm about to offer might, in some small way, make amends. Enclosed with this letter is a key. It opens a safety deposit box at Millbrook National Bank. Inside, you will find documents transferring ownership of a significant portion of Blackwell Industries to you, along with a substantial monetary sum. It's not charity, Ms. Mitchell. Consider it back pay with interest for the career I stole from you. Use it as you see fit, expand your program, help more kids, or simply secure your own future. The choice is yours. I don't expect your forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I hope that you will accept this gift in the spirit in which it is intended, as a recognition of the wrong I did you, and an attempt to set things right. You were the teacher my son needed. I was too blind to see it then. I'm sorry it took me so long to learn that lesson. Sincerely, Robert Blackwell." Sarah lowered the letter, her hands shaking. She looked up at Harrington, who was watching her with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Is this some kind of joke?" she whispered. Harrington shook his head solemnly. "I assure you, Ms. Mitchell, it's very real. Mr. Blackwell was quite insistent about this bequest. If you'll accompany me to Millbrook, we can verify the contents of the safety deposit box and begin the transfer of assets." Sarah leaned back in her chair, her mind spinning. After all these years, after everything that had happened, Robert Blackwell had left her a fortune. It was almost too much to comprehend. As she sat there, staring at the key that promised to unlock a new chapter in her life, Sarah couldn't help but feel that the universe had a strange sense of humor. The man who had once taken everything from her was now offering her a second chance at the life she'd lost. But as the initial shock began to wear off, a new question formed in Sarah's mind. One that would set in motion the final, most dramatic act of this decades-long saga. What would she do with this unexpected windfall? And how would it change not just her life, but the lives of everyone she'd come to care for in Boston? The answer, as Sarah would soon discover, would be more complex and far-reaching than she could have ever imagined. The journey back to Millbrook felt surreal. As the familiar landscape of her former home came into view, Sarah's emotions swirled like autumn leaves in a gust of wind. Anticipation, anxiety, and a strange sense of homecoming battled within her. The Millbrook National Bank stood as it always had, a stolid brick building at the heart of Main Street. Sarah followed James Harrington through its polished doors, acutely aware of the curious glances from townsfolk who recognized her. In a private room, the safety deposit box was opened. Sarah's breath caught as she saw its contents. Stock certificates, bank statements, and legal documents that confirmed Robert Blackwell's letter. The sum was staggering, tens of millions of dollars in assets and liquid funds. "Ms. Mitchell," Harrington said gently, "you'll need to decide how you want to proceed. We can begin the transfer process immediately, or you can take some time to consider your options." Sarah nodded numbly, her mind racing. I need some time," she managed. As she stepped out of the bank, the weight of her decision pressed down on her. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the street, and Sarah found herself wandering, lost in thought. Her feet carried her to Evergreen High School. She stood across the street, staring at the building that had once been the center of her world. It looked smaller somehow, less imposing than she remembered. "Ms. Mitchell?" a hesitant voice called out. Sarah turned to see a middle-aged man approaching, recognition dawning on his face. "It is you. I thought I was seeing things." Took Sarah a moment to place him. "Tommy? Tommy Reardon." He grinned, nodding. "Yes, ma'am, though it's Mr. Reardon now. I teach English here." Sarah felt a surge of pride. Tommy had been one of her most promising students, always with his nose in a book. "That's wonderful, Tommy. I'm so glad to hear that." His expression grew serious. "Ms. Mitchell, I never got to thank you. That last year when everything happened, your belief in me, it made all the difference. I wouldn't be where I am today without you." Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes. "Thank you, Tommy. That means more than you know." As they parted ways, Sarah's resolve began to crystallize. She pulled out her phone and dialed a familiar number. "Marcus?" To Sarah, "I need your advice on something big." Over the next few days, Sarah threw herself into research and planning. She met with financial advisors, lawyers, and community leaders. She revisited old haunts and reconnected with former colleagues. A week after her arrival in Millbrook, Sarah called a press conference on the steps of the town hall. Cameras flashed and microphones thrust forward as she approached the podium. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady. "Many of you know me as the teacher who left Millbrook under controversial circumstances years ago. Today, I stand before you not to dwell on the past, but to look to the future." She took a deep breath. "Robert Blackwell left me a substantial inheritance. After much consideration, I've decided to use these funds to establish the Millbrook-Boston Educational Alliance." A murmur ran through the crowd. Sarah continued, "This foundation will create a bridge between Millbrook and inner-city Boston, funding scholarships, teacher exchanges, and joint educational initiatives. We'll bring the resources of Millbrook to students who need them most, while exposing Millbrook students to diverse perspectives and experiences." As Sarah outlined her vision, she could see the impact of her words. Some faces showed excitement, others skepticism, but all were engaged. This is an opportunity for healing, for growth, and for building a better future for all our children, Sarah concluded. "I hope you'll join me in this endeavor." The questions came fast and furious after her announcement. As Sarah fielded them, she caught sight of a familiar face at the back of the crowd. Jason Blackwell stood watching, his expression unreadable. Later that evening, as Sarah sat in her hotel room, there was a knock at the door. She opened it to find Jason standing there, looking older and more careworn than she remembered. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, his voice rough, I think we need to talk." As Sarah invited him in, she realized that this conversation could change everything. The past and present were colliding in ways she never could have predicted, and the future hung in the balance. What would come of this unexpected reunion? And how would it shape the legacy Sarah was trying to build? The answers to these questions would prove to be the most surprising twist of all in this long and winding tale. Sarah gestured for Jason to enter, her heart pounding with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. As he stepped into the room, she was struck by how much he had changed. Gone was the cocky teenager she remembered. In his place stood a man who seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Can I get you something to drink?" Sarah offered, falling back on ingrained hospitality. Jason shook his head. "No, thank you. I won't take up much of your time." He paused, struggling to find the right words. "I wanted to apologize for everything, not just for what happened back then, but for not having the courage to reach out sooner. Sarah studied him, searching for any trace of the entitled young man she once knew. "Why now, Jason?" He sank into a nearby chair, running a hand through his graying hair. "My father's death, I suppose. It made me realize how much time has passed, how many mistakes I've made. When I heard about your foundation, it hit me hard. You're still trying to make a difference. After everything we put you through." Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions wash over her. "It wasn't just about you, Jason. It was about integrity, about doing what's right even when it's hard." Jason nodded, a rueful smile on his face. "A lesson I learned far too late. Ms. Mitchell, I want to help. With your foundation. I know I can never make up for what happened, but maybe I can do some good now." Sarah was taken aback. "You want to help? How?" "I have connections, resources. I can open doors, help secure additional funding. And," he hesitated, "I have a son now. He's starting high school next year. I want him to have the kind of teacher I should have appreciated when I had the chance." As they talked into the night, Sarah felt a shift in the air. It was as if a long frozen river had finally begun to thaw, bringing with it the possibility of new growth. Over the next few months, the Millbrook-Boston Educational Alliance took shape. With Jason's help, Sarah navigated the complex world of educational policy and corporate partnerships. The foundation grew beyond her initial vision, expanding to include mentorship programs, cutting-edge educational technology initiatives, and community outreach projects. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Some in Millbrook resented the changes, seeing them as a threat to the status quo. Others in Boston were skeptical of Sarah's motives, questioning whether this was just another example of wealthy outsiders trying to fix their community. Sarah found herself walking a tightrope, balancing the needs and concerns of two very different worlds. There were late nights poring over budgets, heated debates with school boards, and moments of doubt when it all seemed too much. Through it all, she drew strength from the students, both in Millbrook and Boston, whose lives were being transformed by the opportunities the foundation provided. 1 year after the foundation's launch, Sarah stood on the stage at Evergreen High School's auditorium. The room was packed with students, teachers, and community members from both Millbrook and Boston. "Today," Sarah began, her voice strong and clear, "we celebrate not just the achievements of the past year, but the promise of the future. We've seen students from Millbrook volunteer in Boston classrooms, and Boston students discover new passions through Millbrook's resources. We've watched barriers break down and understanding grow." She paused, looking out over the sea of faces. "But our work is far from over. There will always be challenges, always be those who resist change. To them, I say this: education is not about maintaining the status quo. It's about growth, about pushing boundaries and expanding horizons." As applause filled the room, Sarah caught Jason's eye in the front row. He nodded, a look of respect and admiration on his face. Beside him sat his son, Mark, eagerly taking in the scene. Later, as Sarah mingled with attendees, Mark approached her shyly. "Ms. Mitchell, I just wanted to say, I hope I can be in your class next year. Dad says you're the best teacher he ever had." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. "I'd be honored to have you in my class, Mark. But remember, every teacher has something valuable to offer. The key is to always be open to learning." As she watched Mark return to his father, Sarah felt a sense of coming full circle. The path that had led her here had been long and often painful, but standing in this moment, she knew it had all been worth it. Yet even as she basked in the glow of success, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered a warning. The biggest challenges and the most unexpected twists were still to come. The true test of her legacy was just beginning. Little did Sarah know that events were already in motion that would shake the very foundations of everything she had built, forcing her to confront not just her past, but the true meaning of her life's work. The stage was set for the final, most dramatic act of her extraordinary journey. As the Millbrook-Boston Educational Alliance entered its 3rd year, Sarah Mitchell found herself at the helm of an organization that had grown beyond her wildest dreams. The foundation's success had garnered national attention, with educators and policymakers from across the country looking to replicate its model. But with great success came great scrutiny. On a crisp autumn morning, much like the one that had changed her life so many years ago, Sarah's world was once again turned upside down. She was in her office in Boston, reviewing applications for the foundation's newest scholarship program, when her assistant burst in, face pale. "Sarah, you need to see this," he said, handing her a tablet. The headline screamed across the screen, "Educational Alliance under investigation. Fraud and mismanagement alleged." Sarah's blood ran cold as she scanned the article. Anonymous sources claimed that funds were being misappropriated, that the foundation's impact was being grossly exaggerated, and most damning of all, that Sarah herself was profiting illegally from her position. "This is ridiculous," Sarah muttered, her mind racing. None of this is true, but the damage was already done. Within hours, the story had gone viral. Sarah's phone rang incessantly with calls from board members, donors, and reporters. Social media exploded with speculation and accusations. As Sarah and her team scrambled to respond, more allegations surfaced. A former employee came forward, claiming they had been fired for questioning the foundation's practices. Documents began to leak, their contents twisted and taken out of context to paint a damning picture. The storm Sarah had weathered years ago in Millbrook seemed like a gentle breeze compared to this hurricane of controversy. In the midst of the chaos, Sarah received an unexpected call. It was Jason Blackwell. "Sarah, it's not just the media," he said, his voice tense. "There's an official investigation being launched. The board is meeting tonight to discuss suspending operations pending the outcome." Sarah felt as if the ground was crumbling beneath her feet. Everything she had worked for, all the lives she had hoped to change, it was all in jeopardy. As she prepared to face the board, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than met the eye. The timing, the coordinated nature of the attacks, it felt orchestrated. But who would want to destroy the foundation, and why? With these questions swirling in her mind, Sarah steeled herself for the fight of her life. She had overcome adversity before, had rebuilt her life from the ashes of destruction. She would not let her life's work be dismantled by lies and innuendo. As she walked into the emergency board meeting, Sarah knew that the next few hours would determine not just her fate, but the fate of countless students who depended on the foundation. What she didn't know was that the true source of the attacks, and the key to salvaging everything she had built, lay hidden in an unexpected place, one that would force her to confront the deepest, most painful parts of her past. The stage was set for a showdown that would test Sarah's integrity, resilience, and the very principles she had fought so hard to uphold. And as the boardroom doors closed behind her, Sarah Mitchell prepared to face the greatest challenge of her life. The boardroom was tense, filled with anxious faces and whispered conversations. As Sarah took her seat at the head of the table, she could feel the weight of every gaze upon her. The accusations hung in the air like a thick fog, threatening to suffocate everything she had built. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. "I know we're here to discuss the recent allegations against the foundation and against me personally. I want to state unequivocally that these accusations are false." She laid out a detailed defense, methodically addressing each allegation with facts and figures. As she spoke, Sarah could see doubt giving way to confusion on some faces, while others remained skeptical. Just as she was finishing, the boardroom doors burst open. A young man Sarah didn't recognize rushed in, breathless and clutching a laptop. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he panted, "but you all need to see this." The young man, who introduced himself as Alex, a junior IT specialist for the foundation, quickly set up his laptop and projected its screen onto the wall. "I've been digging through our systems ever since the allegations broke," Alex explained, "and I found something unusual." What unfolded over the next hour left the room in stunned silence. Alex had uncovered evidence of a sophisticated cyber attack on the foundation's systems. Financial records had been altered, emails fabricated, and data manipulated, all to create the illusion of impropriety. But the real bombshell came when Alex traced the attack back to its source. "It originated from Blackwell Industries," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. All eyes turned to Jason Blackwell, who sat frozen in his chair, his face a mask of shock and confusion. I had no idea," Jason stammered. "This can't be right." As the implications sank in, Sarah's mind raced. Who at Blackwell Industries would want to destroy the Foundation? And then, like a bolt of lightning, it hit her. "Robert," she breathed. It was Robert Blackwell. The room erupted in confused murmurs, but Sarah held up a hand for silence. "Think about it," she continued. "The attack was sophisticated, planned long in advance. It had to have been set in motion before Robert's death. But why? It was Jason who provided the missing piece. The guilt," he said, his voice hollow. "In his final years, my father was consumed by regret over what he'd done to you, Sarah. He left you the inheritance as a way to make amends. But I think part of him couldn't bear the thought of you succeeding where he had failed." Sarah sat back, the weight of realization settling over her. "So he set up this final test, to see if I would stay true to my principles even when everything was on the line." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. With the truth revealed, the media narrative quickly shifted. The Foundation was exonerated, its reputation not just restored but enhanced by its resilience in the face of adversity. As the dust settled, Sarah found herself once again standing before a crowd, this time at a ceremony marking the Foundation's triumphant return to full operations. "We've been tested," she began, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "Tested in ways I never could have imagined. But we've emerged stronger, more committed than ever to our mission." She paused, looking out over the sea of faces, students, teachers, board members, and supporters from both Millbrook and Boston. "Years ago, I stood up for what I believed was right, even when it cost me everything. Today, we've all stood together for those same principles. And in doing so, we've proven that integrity, education, and the belief in human potential can overcome any obstacle." As applause filled the air, Sarah caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd. Tommy Reardon, now a respected teacher himself, gave her a small nod of pride and gratitude. In that moment, Sarah felt the full weight of her journey, from a young teacher standing up to power, through years of struggle and rebuilding, to this pinnacle of success and vindication. She had come full circle, and in doing so had changed not just her own life, but countless others. As she stepped down from the podium, surrounded by well-wishers and supporters, Sarah knew that while this chapter of her story was closing, a new one was just beginning. The Foundation would continue to grow, to challenge, and to inspire. And Sarah Mitchell, the teacher who had once lost everything for standing up for what she believed in, would lead the way, a living testament to the power of integrity, perseverance, and the enduring impact of a dedicated educator. The end, and a new beginning. Thank you for listening until the end. Share your opinion about the story in the comments and let us know which character you liked the most. If this story touched you and you want to hear more, click on the next story appearing on your screen. Leave a like and subscribe to our channel so we can build a great community of people who share emotional stories together. Until the next story.